Hello, my name is Ann Richardson, and I'm a writer. I'm here today to talk to you about the kind of books I write because they're a little bit different from many others. The official genre is called creative nonfiction, but I don't think that tells you very much at all. What really they are rather like documentaries. I don't know about you, but I love watching documentaries on the television or sometimes even on movies where someone explains something, but they do it through talking to people and letting those people explain themselves what they feel about some issue, whatever it is. And I was for many years a qualitative researcher, which is the kind of person who goes out and does interviews and focus groups, rather than a researcher who looks at long lots of statistics and analyzes how many people think something or what percentage of people are telling you whatever. My interest was in getting to the heart of what people feel about an issue, and the interviews of the power of an interview is very, very strong. There's something about letting people talk and giving them enough time and gaining the trust of a person so that they really do tell you what they feel and not what they think you want to hear. And that's really very strong and powerful. And so all of my books are based on this method. I will tell you a little bit about each of them. They're not a series, then if you're interested in one, you might not be interested in the other, so please bear with me and I will explain them one by one. The first book I wrote was about people with AIDS back in the early 1990s when there was no cure and everybody was dying. Nobody was really living. Occasionally people lived beyond then, but mostly they could not survive. And they all knew that. So there's a group of people, many of them young, many of them gay men, but not entirely, who knew they were dying and had to cope with this fact all of a sudden when they got the diagnosis. And they talked to us about how it felt to get the diagnosis, how it felt to tell their parents, how it felt to tell their partners and their friends, how it felt to cope with doctors who didn't know very much about the disease and so were not always very helpful, how to cope with the stigma that they got, because there was a lot of stigma then, hard to believe now, about being homosexual, certainly a stigma about having AIDS, much more so than now with COVID. And they were under an enormous lot of pressure, but their stories are very interesting, and many of the people that I interviewed had somehow come to terms with their situation and were very impressive people. And for that reason, I called the book Wise Before Their Time. It's what I felt that they were. The book was originally published by HarperCollins, but is now published by Glenmore Press, and it has a foreword by Sir Ian McKellen, I'm very happy to say. He wrote a lovely little foreword in which he said, among other things, that this book is as powerful as any great classic of fiction, which is the kind of review that any author is very pleased to get. The book is available from Amazon, of course, as well as from Apple and Kobo and all the usual ebooks. It's also available as a paperback. And it is a very memorable book. I talk to people and say, oh, I remember reading that a long time ago. It just somehow sticks with you. So it's not a beach read. I wouldn't recommend it for that. But it is very, very interesting, especially as we are now in the era of COVID and people are aware of pandemics. This was a much worse pandemic in some ways in that it was only hitting certain groups of people with this terrible stigma attached to it. The second book is on a different subject entirely. I went to work in a hospice as a volunteer for a number of years, and I found it fascinating that people could have as their job to go to work, not me as a volunteer, but the people who worked there, to go to work every day to deal with dying people. You never knew when you turned up who was going to still be alive and who not, and I thought that might have been very distressing and difficult for people. So I put together a project where I interviewed people in a couple of hospices. I interviewed nurses, doctors, chaplains, various kinds of managers, including the heads of the hospice, and also a very reflective chef who had very interesting things to say about keeping people alive by food, by the kind of food that you offer them when they're dying. And it again is a very powerful book. The people talked quite a lot about all the different things they did to try and meet the needs or the wishes of the people who were dying. There was one man who wanted to die under a tree, and they managed to get him at just the moment when they thought he was about to die under a tree, which I think is wonderful. They also talked about some of the difficulties they experienced. They had a lot of people who were very angry or in denial and gave them a hard time as a result. There were all kinds of difficulties, just general stress that they experienced. But the main point of the book was to talk to them about why they did the work. And there was no question. They loved the work. Every single one of them just adored the work that they did. It wasn't something they did just by chance. They were very drawn to it. They felt it was a great privilege to work with dying people at such an important time, rather like midwives at the time of birth. They really felt it was important, and they expressed this very clearly. And it gives you a wonderful picture of what the best end-of-life care can be. I found many people are interested in it because they're interested in the needs of their parents or themselves in terms of terminal care, but also other people are interested because they're nurses and they're interested in the possibility of working in the profession. Anyway, it's been a very successful book, very well bought, a lot of sales on this book, very well reviewed. I should add that all my books have been very well reviewed. They seem to be very well liked. This one had a foreword by Tony Benn, who will not be a known name probably to Americans, but he was a very well-loved politician, funnily enough, and kind of general statesman in the UK. And I was very pleased that he agreed to write a foreword for the book. This is again available on Amazon in all the usual ways that you can buy a book, both as a paperback and as an ebook. I think it's something that you will find interesting and moving and occasionally even funny, I may say. The third book that I've written has nothing to do with death, neither people dying or looking after people who are dying. I felt it was time to get away from that. And I had become a grandmother in the interim period and decided that this was really a very interesting role to be in. And in fact, I had always previously thought that grandmothers were little old gray women with not much of interest, just sort of tottering along in their dotage. And now I'm a little old gray woman, but I don't think being a grandmother is boring at all. In fact, I don't think being old is boring at all. It changes. Becoming a grandmother changes your relationship with your children. You get to see them a lot more often if you want to see the grandchildren. You have suddenly these lovely new children in your life, babies and then children, and I've now got teenagers in my life. And it's a very special relationship you have with them because you're not the parents, you don't have the responsibility, and when they're babies, yes, you can give them back, but you also have a very great closeness because they know your family members. So I think the more I've become a grandmother, and I've learned more since I wrote the book, but it's a very interesting position to be in, and I think grandmothers find that they love being grandmothers. I think they like themselves more as grandmothers, and they love having children around. But I will say that the book is not just a happy, jolly book, because some grandmothers have a lot of difficulties, and that's what gives the book a bit of edge. And any grandmother who's experiencing difficulties can feel they can read it and not feel they will be left out, because some grandmothers never get to see their grandchildren, either because they live too far away, which is quite common, or even worse, much worse, is where they have difficult relations with the son-in-law or daughter-in-law, whoever it is, or their own son for that matter, and are forbidden to see their grandchildren. And there's some very sad stories of people who are suddenly find themselves with the thrill of being a grandmother but not being able to see their grandchildren. There are also grandparents much more mundanely who just don't like the way their grandchildren are being brought up, and that makes for a bit of sadness. So it's a book with some joy and some sadness expressed. But I think anyone who is a grandmother will respond well to it. And if you're looking for a present for your grandmother, and it's difficult enough to find anything to give to us grandmothers besides flowers and nice soap, it does make a nice change. You can give this book. It's called Celebrating Grandmothers, so the title is a nice title to give. And it is a paperback as well as an ebook. And again, it's available on all those different sites that I've told you before. There is no forward. It's just me. Now, you might think that I was then going to write another book that was like a documentary, and I would like to do so and may still do so. But during the last few years, I've spent some time thinking a lot about what it's like to be old. And I've written a book which has got a lot of little stories, little writings about different aspects of being old, both good qualities like you feel more confident and you sort of know yourself better, which is a very important aspect of being old, but also discussing some of the difficulties, the fact that you lack energy or your friends are getting sick or you're getting sick or whatever. So there are good pluses and minuses, but this book is exploring them. And that book is called The Granny Who Stands on Her Head, Reflections on Growing Older. And it's not yet out, but it will be out very shortly, I hope within the month. I'm just waiting to get a cover designed and it will be out. So that's my books, in case you're interested. Thank you for listening, and I hope you will be interested in pursuing one or more of them. Thank you very much.